everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between a couple of writers, me being one of those two people. I bring on guests of all sorts of different writing backgrounds to the show. Does kind of gravitate towards fiction authors, but that worked well for me because that's what I know. And today I had another fiction author on. Today I had a lovely conversation with the immensely talented Carol Dunbar. So Carol's got a really interesting story. And first of all, I just want to kind of say that her second book, A Winter's Rime, is out on September 12th of this year. That is her follow-up to her first book, The Net Beneath Us. You're going to hear on the interview, she's one of these writers who just knew for years that she was a writer, whether or not she was writing at all. In fact, she pursued theater arts for quite some time until finally meeting her spouse, and then they moved to upstate Wisconsin to live off the grid. So sounds like the perfect location for a writer. But I can tell you that can be very challenging too. But that's when she really started delving into writing, and she basically self-taught an MFA. And her first book, The Net Beneath Us, was a 12-year venture, writing, rewriting, learning, understanding, pitching, getting an agent, all that kind of stuff. And that's my lunatic dog going nuts in the background. Sorry, Scully, be quiet. But that book sold, and she got an agent with that book, and then that book sold, and then she was on to her next one, and now she's kind of off to the races as a working writer. So a very inspiring story. And it was particularly interesting to hear. We talked a lot about the psychology of writing and how Carol's upbringing, which involved a lot of moving because she was a military brat, really kind of not only forced her to be a reader and to enjoy books, but it caused her to be very introspective about her childhood as she was writing that first book, really discovering, the meaning of relationships and perhaps relationships she didn't get to have as a kid through her fiction and through her prose. So that was pretty interesting to hear about. So if you're an aspiring writer, I think you're going to be very motivated by her story. And if you're an established writer, you are definitely going to want to listen to this, and I'm sure we're all going to be buying her books. Carol was a fantastic person to talk to. We made up a lovely little story at the end. This is my conversation with Carol Dunbar. How's it going?
Good. Congratulations on 100 shows. That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a good run. It's expensive.
Is it? Are you still writing full time without your job?
Yeah. So I'm still trying to figure shit out on my end.
That's awesome. I'm totally rooting for you.
Oh, thanks. Me too. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and we'll get into this a little bit. Just, we talk about this a lot on the podcast. It's just about the idea of writing as a career and what that actually means, and how starry-eyed, college students go into, MFAs or being an English major with this idea that they're going to support themselves writing, and it's tough, man. You've got to be very entrepreneurial about it. It's not just like, I'm going to write this book and then the riches will flow. And maybe it was once that time, but it isn't now.
Yeah, I was so naive about that, Carter. I was the most impractical minded. Yeah, I didn't approach it at all the way you did. So.
Well, but I think that naivete is also almost necessary, right? Because if you knew the realities, like, why would you ever pursue this?
Exactly.
Everyone's got a passion for something, but how many people really follow that passion because they're looking like, well, it's really tough to be an astronaut.
Oh, yeah. My husband and I always joke about how delusion can get you a long way.
it's a good place to start for sure.
Yeah.
And to your point, like when I started, I didn't know anything about writing, much less publishing. So I was naive for a while, but I always had that curiosity about industry and business in general. And so it's not hard to research and find out, like, well, how do you get published? How does it work? And how does it pay? And then once you get too far into it, you're like, okay, this is not going to make me any money, but like, this is kind of fun. This is kind of exciting. And then that kind of just propels you, or at least it propelled me for a while. But, I used to always preach, don't quit your day job. So you are up in Wisconsin, right?
Yes. Yep. Northern Wisconsin.
Okay. Packers fan, or you don't care?
My husband is a Minnesota boy.
Okay.
So there's a lot of tension about that because, all the bars around us are all full of Packer fans.
Of course.
But luckily he's 6'4", so he goes in and he's the only Viking fan, and
he can hold his own.
He's making friends.
I asked because my son is a rabid Packers fan, apropos of nothing other than the fact that the year that he started getting into football at age like 7, they were doing well. And so he's like, yeah. And now he's a college student. He's like a locked in Packers fan. And we went to Lambeau one December for a game for his 10th birthday. And I mean, it was literally like Mecca. I mean, I've got a picture of him kneeling or on his knees, prostrate in front of a Lambeau field.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So tell me about growing up. So you grew up in Wisconsin?
No, I'm an import. I ended up here because I fell in love with a Minnesota boy, basically. I grew up moving around. I was born in Guam.
Okay.
I went to high school in Hawaii.
Army brat?
Yep. Navy brat. Yep. Yeah, I think you've talked about that on podcasts before, about how when you grow up that way, it sort of engenders this natural curiosity about how other people live and just other people in general. You become very interested in that, so I ended up here because of the person who I married. And then I learned to love the Midwest, which was unusual for me because it's so landlocked, and I grew up always being able to see the ocean.
Right.
But we're pretty close to the Great Lakes, so
right.
I get my fix that way.
Not the quite same tropical climate that you're used to.
No, but I actually really missed the change of seasons when we lived in Hawaii. That was actually the hardest thing for me. Not that you're gonna feel sorry for me that I had to live there, but right. I missed the cycle, of going in. Like, I love writing during wintertime. It's
me
most
too.
attractive
Right.
for me.
Right. As evidenced by the cover and title of your upcoming release.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I grew up in LA and I was at the beach all the time in Malibu and stuff like that. And I left for college to go to New York, and I haven't lived. Well, I lived in Miami for like a year, but otherwise I haven't lived near the water. And I've been in Colorado for 26, 27 years. I'm like, man, and you nailed it. The change of seasons. That is the thing that I love. It's just like, and right now this precipice of fall is one of my favorite times. So and you just don't get that in those other areas.
Yeah, that's true. It is the transition periods that are so interesting.
Right. There's something hopeful about it. Like, oh, something new is coming. And I think, that's how I approach writing in general, is like, there's always excitement about the unknown of what's coming up next. But so and you've probably heard on some of the podcasts talking to other military brats who, not only was it that being forced to be in different climates, different cultures, different types of people constantly, it was also kind of a little bit the lack of friends, like, just because all of a sudden you're up and moving, depending on how often you were doing that. And so a lot of writers that I've talked to have turned to books. In this day and age, they would turn to their phones. So it's interesting to wonder, like, I wonder what that would have been like for you had you been surrounded by that technology. But I'm assuming you kind of were a bit of a reader as you were a kid.
Yeah. Yes. I think you hit it very well. Like, I think I always read to feel less lonely. And I think I write to make those deeper connections that I was always missing in my day-to-day life. Because we moved a lot. There's lots of different ways you can grow up in the military. And the way my parents did it, my mom never traveled or went anywhere. So when she married my husband, she's like, I'm going everywhere with you. I want to see the world. So there were years we moved 2 or 3 times.
Oh, wow.
It was a lot. We were always on the go. And I remember that just the wrenching of that, like getting really invested in people and then having to leave. And, everyone always promises they'll keep in touch and they'll write. And you really mean it. But real life is always more interesting. Present life is always more interesting.
Everything always fades.
Yeah. Yes. So I kind of got to this place where my relationships weren't very deep. They were kind of shallow. I kind of kept it that way. It was like self-preservation. And then I would go for deep, meaningful humanity experiences. I would turn to books, I think. And I think that's what I do when I write. I think I'm seeking always for those deeper connections. My books always go really deep, like right away. Because that's what I think I've always craved and what I missed.
So you're exploring. So when you say that, expand on that a little bit. So does that mean you are, being empathetic with your protagonist and be like, well, if this were me and they get to have this deep, meaningful relationship, what would that be like? What would that look like?
Yeah, I guess, that is an interesting point. Carter, it's like we have relationships with our characters, like they feel like real people to us. So I think that's what I'm interacting with.
Right.
And going to those places with them, to those deeper places with them.
Got it. So you're able to kind of, use your supply of empathy with your characters to make up for the few people that you were able to kind of go deep with growing up. That makes total sense. I think writing is like that for a lot of people. It's an exploration of self and kind of a form of meditation where you are just kind of letting go and you are experiencing and imagining. And there is something so personal and so private about that. And it's why I look forward to writing every night, because I can literally close the door behind me and be in a small room and just not be alone. You are with the world.
Yes. It's a way to feel less alone. It's so crazy how intimate that relationship is with the reader on the page.
Right.
It's the most intimate relationship. And there's something just so magical about it too, because they can go anywhere in their headspace.
Right.
It's
totally.
A world that you've made for them,
And it's funny, when I'm writing, I don't really want to even talk about it. Nobody knows. My critique group will maybe see a few chapters after I've maybe have come close to writing the first draft. And my agent, I usually give her the first 50 pages. And all of that changes drastically anyway, but I don't talk about my characters. I don't talk about the book because it just feels so personal until I'm ready to present it. And then my partner is the first person who reads it. But it's, it's because it is kind of this friendship that you have that you don't want to share with anyone else. It's weird.
Yeah, it is.
So as you're growing up and as you're moving all over the place, are you thinking about what you might want to study? Are you thinking about college? Are you saying like, I want to be out of here and control my own frequency of moving?
I enjoyed moving. I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed getting to see all these places. I was always making up stories. That was how I survived time in church, actually. Which I hope this isn't blasphemous, but that's what I would do. I would find interesting people in the pews, and I would make up stories about them in my head to kind of pass the slow parts.
I would immediately go dark and be like, yeah, you pretend you're all righteous and holy, but I know what goes behind your front door. I mean, that's low hanging fruit, but
Yeah. I started writing my first books in kindergarten. I was writing full-length books. That was just what I did.
wow.
And I didn't get serious about, I think in third grade, I remember.
I didn't get serious about it until third grade.
Well, no, I wasn't serious about it. But I've heard your guests talk about how, being intentional about studying writing and figuring out how did the author do this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really embrace that mindset until fairly late, until I moved off grid and decided, okay, I'm supposed to be a writer, because I had a whole different career in the theater, and that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I was really dedicated to the art of storytelling as an actor, super passionate about it, even though my very first impulse in life was to write books. I wish I had listened to that. But at the same time, it's another form of storytelling.
Yeah, you're exploring arts.
Yeah. And I'm not a person really who believes in regrets, because I think we are learning through every experience that we have, even if you feel like it ended up, wasting time. It's not a waste of time. You gain things from that. And I do find that to be true with that. But every once in a while, I do wish, I wish I had listened to all those impulses I had about writing so early on. So
yeah, I believe that too. And I do believe all roads lead to where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And, I was talking to Wendy Walker, spoke to a retreat I was running, and she was talking about all of her struggles with writing that first book. And then, it took her like 10 years or something like that. And then when she finally wrote her second book, she's like, it took me 6 months. It was amazing. I'm like, no, it took you 10 years and 6 months to write that second book, because all roads lead to that. You couldn't have written that second book so successfully had you not had all of that past experiences. And much of that past experience is either seemingly irrelevant to writing or it's failure. And those are all tremendous learning opportunities if you can structure your mindset correctly to absorb it like that. And a lot of people, and you probably get this too, it's like, how do you deal with rejection? I could never deal with that rejection. I'm like, well, then you'll never be a writer because you're not framing it as like, how do I get better through this rejection?
Right. I know, it's interesting how much of it is a mind game. Yes. I'm always checking in with myself, like, what's my headspace on this? Because I always need to make sure that I'm focused on the writing, on better as a writer. It's easy when you're in the industry of publishing to be paying attention to all these other things, and they can make you crazy. And I've learned that for myself. The way to sanity and the way to stay grounded and balanced is to just focus on the writing first. Otherwise.
So did you, and I want to talk about this a little bit, did you start writing in earnest after your off the grid move?
Yeah. So,
okay. So talk about that move and where you are.
Yeah, that move was kind of pivotal in my life. It was kind of a crazy thing to do. I had just become a mom, and I was in my late 20s. I had just become a mom, and I had kind of made this sort of devastating realization that I was a storyteller working in the wrong art form. And I really didn't know what to do about it, because all my friends were theater people. My whole life was geared toward the theater. I was living in the city. I was getting all these opportunities. Not in New York City. I thought I would, but then I met that Minnesota boy and I screwed everything up. So I was in that place, though, where, like, if I wanted to, I was one step away from having to join the union, Mm-hmm. And once you do that, you can't get non-union work. And there's a lot of non-union work in Minneapolis, so I was doing fine. But the next step was to either move to LA or New York. And I couldn't do that to my Minnesota boy. He's a country mouse. So I don't know. I didn't know what to do about the fact that I wanted to be a writer. And I mean, I was always writing. My husband and I had like a writing group that we kept going this whole time.
Hmm.
Then one day, my husband sat down on a bench in an airport next to a newspaper with an advertisement circled in ink for an off-grid homestead with a working sawmill. And he was also an actor who had taught himself woodworking. He wanted to build furniture from trees he knew and slabbed out, and I wanted to be a writer. So we just jumped at this. We didn't look at other properties. We didn't compare prices. We didn't look at the schools. We just went, saw it, fell in love with the trees, and left our life in the city. And we had no idea what we were doing.
What year was this?
This was in the summer, August of 2002.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good thing it was summer. If you'd gone in the winter, you'd be like, I'm not doing this.
Well, it was August 19th. So our daughter was 15 months old, and it was like the idyllic time in northern Wisconsin. There were no bugs, and we had this beautiful fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then strangely, we had this really mild winter, which if we had had a different winter, like the one we had last winter, I don't know how things would have gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, we made every mistake like that you can make. We did go a full winter with no running water when the kids were small. I had we had a son too. He was born here on the land, and we were raising two little kids with running generators and pumping water from a well and splitting our firewood for heat, and we were doing all that and figuring it out. And this office and our home are now 100% solar, which is really cool. But about 4 years into this off-grid, me trying to be a writer kind of experiment, my husband had an accident with his table saw.
Oh my God.
And that just stopped everything. And he's okay, but he lost the use of his right hand for a full year.
Oh my God.
And because, the kids were young, they were 2 and 5. And because of the way we live, we do everything the long way, right? We don't have microwaves. We don't have a toaster. It's been 20 years since I've had a clothes dryer. So we can't use his right hand. The kids are small. I had to get a job. And it was fall. It happened in fall, in October. And winter was coming, and we were behind on the wood pile, and I didn't know how to split firewood. That was when I started writing my first novel, 2 weeks after that accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I can't, first of all, for him, I can't, I mean, I haven't been able to use my right hand for 2 weeks with this surgery, and I can't imagine a year. Yeah. I'm like going out of my mind.
You can probably imagine more than most. I mean, that's interesting that you are going through something similar.
But yeah, and you do adapt. I mean, I have a friend who lost his fingers and toes, and you adapt, but it's a painful process. But yeah, particularly in a setting where your hands help run, your lives, and it's totally. I mean, I'm surprised you didn't sit down and start rebooting the Little House on the Prairie series.
I definitely have those books. I loved those books. I read every one. I still have the set. We definitely have a Little House in the Big Woods. That's totally right.
So when you sat down and started writing that first book, what was there? Did you like have an idea that had been kicking around, or is it just like, God damn it, I'm going to sit down and write, even if I don't know what it's going to be?
It was kind of a mix of both. I had no idea how to craft a novel. I didn't know anything. I was operating on pure instinct and what I knew about crafting a drama from studying theater. But I had an idea kicking around in my head about a young family building their house when something, a logging accident happens to the dad, and then the mother has to figure out how to carry on. And when this accident happened, suddenly I understood my story. So I definitely reached for the low-hanging fruit. I was writing very much from this place. I was writing about what it's like to live this way, and all of the things that I had taken for granted because my husband had always done them for me. And so I was really much writing about that. And also the surprising thing that happened was I ended up exploring my loneliness and how bad I was as an adult at making friends. Because that really kind of came clear to me in the aftermath of my real life accident, when people were kind of reaching out to us, and it made me so uncomfortable. I didn't understand the idea of community. I didn't know how to accept help from people. I didn't know how to belong to a place. I didn't know how to be a deep and abiding friend. So I felt really uncomfortable with all this, and I was like, wow, what's wrong with you? What's going on there, Carol? And I kind of really dug into that with my main character because I wanted to understand it. And I really learned a lot through her. And that's where all the tree research came in. There's a lot of tree wisdom in that first novel because I discovered that the best role models for successful communities are in the root systems of the forest where I live, the way trees communicate to each other, the way they give each other support and nourishment. There's so much there, and it was really cool to learn all that and to take inspiration from that.
Yeah, totally. That's very interesting. And one of the struggles, I think, with writing, especially when you're starting out, is having that necessary time to explore those things and to almost psychoanalyze yourself through the process, balancing that with, okay, is this a story anyone wants to read? and you don't know, I still don't know to this day after so many novels. I'll get deep into a book and my editor will be like, yeah, I could use less of this. I'm like, oh, I love that part. He's like thinking about this. I don't realize, like, all right, you're going too deep into your own belief system or whatever it is, and you're losing the reader. So you're writing this book. How long did it take you to write that first book?
I'm afraid to tell you. It took me 12 years.
Yeah. And what was that process like over 12 years? Was it like, okay, time to rewrite it again, or was it like exploring, trying to get an agent after the first year and then rewriting it, or what was, or could you not let it be finished?
I felt like the story that I was given was way up here and my ability as a writer was way down here, because the way the story came to me, it's a rotating narrative. So I have it's rotating third, not first person. So I had to figure out, the story needed that. First of all, we can't be inside a grieving widow's head 100% of the time. It would be a very not enjoyable read, right? So we needed the point of views of the other family members in the aftermath of this logging accident. So we get to hear from 4 family members besides just the mother, wife character. So I had to learn how to do that, how to do rotating narrative. I had to learn about psychic distance. I had to learn about the situation versus the story, inner versus outer. I had all this stuff I had to figure out. And I just kept learning. And I really wasn't in a hurry to be published because I knew how hard it was. I knew how hard the industry was. And I was writing literary fiction. And I knew that self-publishing wasn't really an option for me. So if I was going to do this, I had to really make it good. I had to get myself where I wanted to be as a writer and before I could even think about trying to get published. And I was really okay with that. I really enjoyed the process of learning the craft. And I would put my book in timeout all the time because I would get so frustrated.
Yeah.
It was a lot to take on. And I only had like 20 minutes or 45-minute, little writing sprints. My writing schedule was very inconsistent. It was the thing I was always trying to do. So I would put my book in timeout a lot and write short stories. And that was gratifying because then I could actually finish something and put it out there.
When you can write about something else.
Yes, write about something else and learn, like work on something like, okay, I got to practice this skill, and I also started putting some essays out there and that turned out to be very rewarding. And it helped me to grow, and it helped keep me going, and it helped keep me inspired and encouraged. So those little timeouts, those little breaks were good. And then I would go back to it and suddenly, oh, I can see why this isn't working.
Yeah.
You can see it when you're.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to see no matter what, because it's yours and you spent so much time with it. But I have to imagine that, so first of all, I mean, you basically self-taught your own MFA, which is pretty much what I did because I didn't know anything either. But I do feel like there's a balance between, studying the art of writing and then just actually writing. And I definitely lean towards just writing because the more I study it, the more it gets in my head. I'm like, if you start thinking about all plots should have this and that, then I lose the joy. And I'm like, no, but what if this happens? But you mentioned having a couple essays published along the way. And that's definitely not something to downplay, right? Because that's the type of thing that gives you, like, somebody else is saying, yeah, you're a writer. And that's a pretty transcendental moment when that happens. A third party who you don't know publishes something of yours. And there's just such validation there that you almost didn't even realize you were needing so much because it's so lacking most of the time as a writer.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Especially, when I got published in a literary journal, and in that same journal, there was a short story by Ron Rash.
Mm-hmm.
I was over the moon. I was for a year. I was
right. Handing out copies to anyone you meet on the street.
Totally. Oh, I actually embarrassingly did that to a couple in the airport once.
Oh my God, I love it. I can sign this for you if you want. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after 12 years, what do you do?
So during I knew I was ready because I read this book that said that had a list of 10 things I had to do before I sought an agent. It's a book published. It's called Your First Novel, and it's written by an agent and an editor with a foreword by Dennis Lehane. Mm-hmm. And there's a list of 10 things in there, and I did them. And one of the things is to present your book and give a reading. And I thought that was such a scary thing to do. I did it at a nursing home to a group of readers at an assisted living facility. And that turned out to be the most valuable thing I did to get ready to query, because it taught me how to talk about my book. It forced me to figure out how to talk about my book. And then getting their feedback showed me where people's interest was, so that I knew how to talk about it in a way that was interesting to the reader. Right.
You're talking to a group of people who have no investment in you. They're not your family. They don't have to pretend to be excited about your book, Right. And that is scary.
It is. I really struggled with the whole learning how to talk about your book thing. Because it was such a private thing for me. I was really working through some heavy stuff. So it was like door shut for so long. And then when door open happened and I had to explain what I had been doing, it was kind of tricky for me. So figuring that out was really helpful. And I went to a writing conference where I signed up for one of those pitch sessions. Yeah. And I thought that my pitch was, my query letter. But it turns out this agent, she just wanted a sentence. And I found this out the night. So, and I went with a friend. So my friend and I were freaking out. We're like, how do we write this sentence? I mean, you spend 12 years on a novel. You're supposed to boil it down to one sentence. So we're freaking out. And we had taken a class that day where this wonderful novelist, Carol Dunbar, taught us this thing called goal, conflict, motivation, goal, conflict. Goal, motivation, conflict. I think that was the order. Goal, motivation, conflict. She said, your query needs to have those three things. We need to know the character's goal, we need to know their motivation, why, and we need to know what the conflict is. So that was really helpful. So I stayed up all night trying to write one freaking sentence. And then the next morning, my friend and I got together and we read each other's those. And then we went and pitched. And I remember walking in there, I sat down. It was two sentences. The first sentence was the genre, word count, and your comp titles.
Yeah.
And then I gave her my sentence. And it was such an awesome moment because she took out her card and she handed it to me and she said, I'm interested.
Oh.
I got out of that room, texting my daughter. I was so excited. So, and then, you have to go through the first 50 and then you wait and then, the full manuscript and then you wait. So it was that process.
But that was eventually became your agent?
She did, yes. And I did have another agent that was interested. I stopped querying after 10 because I had two that had gone all the way through the full manuscript. And I felt really good about both of them. And so I stopped at querying at 10. And I feel very lucky. I feel like my query
You are very lucky.
Was very much less fraught than everyone I know, really. But I really did wait a long time. I mean, 12 years. I
put in the work ahead of time.
I did. I feel like I did. And I was very intentional about that. So
yeah,
it paid off for me. I know I still got lucky, though, especially with the agent that I did find, because she's such a gem. I didn't realize how much I'd be relying on this person. I didn't realize how much I would need to trust them. I'd feel so lucky.
Totally. No, I've been with the same agent for 20 years now. And I feel the same way. And like you hear all these stories about other agents and even like if you hear about like huge high profile agents, but I hear people are like, but they'll call me back like 3 weeks after I leave a message or say, and I'm like, I want to be with people I like, that I respect, that we work well together. We're a good team. That's all that's important to me. But it's interesting that one sentence concept. And I think that's a good takeaway for listeners is that, that seems maybe a bit draconian, to, like you said, I've worked on this thing for 12 years. Now I got to distill it to a sentence. The reality of it is that's what editors that they are going to be pitching your book to are basically they want to know the hook. And my editor says this all the time. What's the hook? What's the hook? What's the hook? Because I need a hook so I can pitch. That's what it is. So one sentence is a bit frugal, but it still boils down to like people are not going to have a lot of time to listen to your pitch. So make it count, and it doesn't matter how much time you've spent on it. And the other reality of it is when you get an agent, the other thing you're going to want to know, and the editors that they're sending this stuff is going to want to know is like, what else does she have? And your whole life has been around this one book. You're like, what else? Don't even talk to me about what else. So is your debut novel this same book?
So my debut was The Net Beneath Us. That came out in 2022.
Oh, okay.
And A Winter's Rime is coming out this fall in 2023. So when we went out with The Net Beneath Us, the pandemic hit. So
The Net Beneath Us is the 12-year book.
That's the 12-year book. And the cool thing was, because I didn't have another book, I was, I asked my agent, okay, what do I do, while I'm waiting to hear about all of the offers I'm going to get, right? And and she said, just focus on your next book.
Yeah.
And
you got to let it go.
Yeah, that was the best advice
Totally.
I was given, and the advice I'm the happiest that I really truly took it. I really stopped thinking about it. I mean, we were getting in the rejections, and then the pandemic hit, and then publishing shut down, and nobody was getting published, and people were losing their jobs. I was fine because I was writing my next book, and I was talking to my agent about it, and she was really supportive. She wasn't giving up on the first book, but she did say, maybe this is your first book. Maybe The Net Beneath Us will be your second book. Everything was uncertain. And the only thing, she is very much about controlling what you can control. And she said, as the writer, the only thing you can control is your writing, getting better as a writer, right, and keep working as a writer. And that's what I love about writing. Unlike theater, where you can't act in a play unless you have a director and a stage and a million other people with you.
The words aren't yours.
Oh, I can always write. I always have a notebook with me because there's really no excuse. I mean, you can always do it. So I just love that about writing. So I took her advice, and when we finally did get a book deal, and because of the pandemic, it took a while. Sure. My editor wanted to kind of wait until things had settled down a little bit. And so
you've got all these books that are backlogged too. So, and the idea,
all these books.
No, I mean, the editor does. Like the publishing houses.
Oh,
their schedules are all screwed up.
Yeah.
Because they spend so much time thinking about, the seasonal campaigns of all these different books that are maybe 2 years out. And now all of a sudden you have at least, 6 to 8 months that are just completely gone, that everything gets pushed back.
Yeah. Yes. And I did feel like when my novel came out last fall, like everybody came out with their novel, like all the big writers came out with their novels. So I was just a little blip, kind of buried under all of it. But it was still thrilling. And,
of course.
Yeah,
of course. And now you have your second coming out next week, right?
Yeah.
Next Tuesday.
Gosh, on the 12th. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes.
But it's exciting. Like, and it's only your second, so I'm sure it's not already getting old and like, oh, I've been through all this, but it's, even after 10, it doesn't get old. It's just still like exciting. But I think that advice that you mentioned is so critical. And even after your book comes out, it's like the idea of letting something go and focusing on the joy of writing something new and just letting the world happen and however it's going to happen, and acknowledging you have no control over that, I think is pretty important.
Yes. I didn't realize before going through the process the reality of the timeline of a working writer, where you're having to promote a book that you finished a year ago. Mm-hmm. Like you had your big triumphs and your huge emotional moments with it, and then you had to let it go. But now you're talking about it, but your heart is really with another story already. Totally. And I never realized that before. It's kind of crazy.
It is crazy. And then what you'll find as you write more and more books is then you'll be asked to do a book club or a discussion or about something you wrote years ago, and people will bring up points of like, I don't even know who you're talking about. I don't even remember that secondary character because my mind has been through so many different characters since that time. And it is weird because people have these emotional connections to characters that you vaguely remember. And I'm like, am I losing my mind? Or it's such a strange thing for sure.
Oh, I will look forward to getting to that point, Carter. I have 10 books behind me, and I hope that happens to me someday.
But it's fun because it's like you never know what your book is going to do. And the best could always be yet to come. I say that all the time. It doesn't matter what age you are. You could have a breakout novel when you're 80. It as long as you have that ability to dream and to storytell and to physically write, there's really no limits, which I think is amazing.
That is the exciting thing about it. Definitely. Yes. Also to just think, for me, I get really excited when I think about the life of a book. Mm-hmm. Like it can go anywhere. Mm-hmm. Anybody could read it, 10 years from now, somebody could read it. And when I think about the books that changed my life and that affected me deeply, it really excites me to think that somebody could find my book anywhere, in the basement of a church. It could be
Right.
on an island. It could be anywhere. It's cool to think about the life that a book has and all the places it goes and all the hands that it goes through.
Totally. And then when somebody posts on Instagram a sentence of yours that they loved, that connected with them, like, wow. Like I wrote something that connected with this random person and that made a difference in their day somehow. And like you said, it could be years and years and years later. And it's such a weird thing. I think Stephen King called it time travel. And that's totally what it is, because things can just pop up at any time. So, but that's very exciting. Well, Carol, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick storytelling. Speaking of all the storytelling we've been talking about, I've chosen 3 books, mostly at random from my bookshelves, and you're going to pick one of those, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that's going to be the first sentence in like a 2-minute long, quick short story. It'll be a mess.
I'm a slow writer. I'm so scared about this.
Well, it's so what's been interesting for me in these last 2 weeks, how I've been trying to write is I've been trying to write through dictation. And as often as I do this impromptu storytelling, I thought like, okay, I'll be able to do this pretty well because I can storytell. Okay. I can at all. I find like how I phrase things mentally and how it comes out when I speak is totally different than how I actually write.
Same way, totally, 100%.
And I didn't really appreciate that until these last 2 weeks. And it's been pretty defeating, to be honest with you.
I don't heal quickly.
I get this big clump off tomorrow. So I've got The Ruins by Scott Smith, Ali Land's Good Me, Bad Me, and Allen Folsom's The Day After Tomorrow. So choose one of those.
Let's do The Day After Tomorrow.
Okay. It's a big book. Give me a page between 1 and 700.
137.
Okay. And I'm just going to quickly scan for a sentence that might work as a good first sentence. All right. This is very basic. So you can go wherever you want with this. McVeigh leaned over and picked up a cup of black coffee.
He saw his nose in the reflection, mirrored back at him. And he thought about his wife and how they were going to have kids. And he thought about being a father and how he was going to do everything different. And then he set the cup down without drinking any. He looked up and he said,
"Fuck it, I'm going to have scotch instead." He went to the cupboard, pulled out a half-full bottle, and poured himself 2 fingers in an old glass he usually reserved for special occasions. This was a special occasion, he figured. I'm about to royally mess my life up. I have complete control over whether I do what I'm about to do, but I know I'm going to screw everything up. He downed the shot and removed his tie.
Shining down where they were sitting at the kitchen table, and he handed it to the boy. Randy didn't drink it, not at first. McVeigh put on his jacket. He laced up his boots. "Where you going, Dad?" Randy said. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't even know really what he was going to do, but he was going to take care of it for his son. That he knew.
It's funny how all those things in your subconscious work over time without you even really trying. I mean, suppose that's why they called it a subconscious to begin with. He got into his car and felt under the seat for that gun that he subconsciously bought 3 days earlier. Then he checked it, make sure it was loaded with the bullets that he had also subconsciously bought, and slid it back under the seat. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror and told himself there was still a chance. There was still a chance he could do something, a million different things than this one thing. And then he just laughed. He was never good at lying to himself. I think we just call it there.
I think so too.
That was good.
I want to know what's going to happen.
McVeigh was about to do something very naughty.
I think so. He had a motivation, though.
Exactly. It's immensely pitchable, as my editor would say. Well, Carol, what a pleasure meeting you and speaking to you and learning about your writer's life and a little bit about living off grid, which sounds pretty amazing and a little scary.
Yes, it's all those things. Thank you. It was a pleasure chatting with you. I love your show. I love what you do. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. And congrats on the upcoming release. And I hope to see you in person someday.
Sounds awesome.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that's it. That is my conversation with Carol Dunbar. I told you that was a pretty cool story. Man, something about writing about decisions. Decisions are the heart of every story, right? What's the decision you need to make, and is it going to be the right decision, and how are you going to judge if it's the right decision? Good stuff. I encourage you to check out A Winter's Rime, which is coming out September 12th. You can read all about Carol at her wonderful website, very wintry website, caroldunbar.com. And please feel free to check out my website, carterwilson.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter, check out my appearances, and get to know a little bit about all of my books. That's it for now. Thank you as always for watching and or listening to this. You guys make this show work. Doesn't work without you. More episodes coming out soon. In the meantime, take care.